In the second part of this three-part series, we are going to talk about the different aspects of a presentation: the set, dialogue, and closure. So this is part 2 of the three-part lecture. What is the set? When we talk about the set, we refer to setting the scene. At the very beginning of the lecture, you want to lay down some ground rules and tell your students where this is going, or tell your audience where this is going. You need to introduce the topic and establish its importance, and clarify the roles of the speaker and the audience. Are you going to entertain questions throughout the talk or the end? Will you expect audience participation? And generally, sometimes you have to just remind people that crosstalk is not good, as it disrupts the flow of things. Dialogue is what we consider the bulk of a talk or a lecture or presentation. This is where you actually present your topic. And there are several parts to this. You need to state your objectives, then cover this information systematically, then restate any important points, while seeking confirmation that the audience understands what you're talking about, and then restate your salient points again. When we talk about dialogue, it's a two-way street. Information is given and information is received. One natural and easy way to do this is to ask questions. It's also useful to use humor to keep your audience awake, and break up the talk in some way, particularly if it lasts more than, say, 10 or 15 minutes. This can be done in several ways. You can ask the audience to reflect on something that you have just mentioned. Let's spend some time to think about this or that or the other. You can break a bigger audience into smaller groups and allow them to talk amongst themselves and then feed back to the bigger group as another way of breaking up a talk. Make sure you don't carry on too long. An audience attention span is less than 15 minutes. So if you have been talking non-stop for more than 15 minutes, you have lost your audience. And in a more general way, stick to time. If you have been given 20 minutes to cover a topic, make sure you finish within that 20 minutes with enough time for people to ask questions and clarify things. Questions are a very important part of the dialogue, and they may serve many functions. I just want you to spend the next half a minute thinking about different questions and what functions they may have in a presentation. You can pause the video here and think about this for a little while. Okay, let's see. So, they can ensure understanding of the audience. However, bear in mind, asking the audience, do you understand? Doesn't give you any information. It's better to ask a question. So can anybody tell me why we would use Lasix in a patient with cardiac failure? Then when you get the answer, you know if they're right or they're wrong. It allows some feedback from the audience. Does anybody have any questions or need any clarification on what I just said? And then they can ask questions and you can answer. It's a good way of encouraging participation and discussion, and sometimes it can be used as a little trick to move the lecture forward. So we've given Lasix and it hasn't worked. What would be your next drug of choice? And then that may move us on to talking about GTN or other appropriate medication according to the case. Remember that questions may be closed-ended or open-ended. So closed-ended questions have only one right answer usually, or a limited scope for discussion. So that's like, what is the CCG rhythm? If it's VF, you don't have to say VF, there's not much discussion here. It can ensure understanding, and it can help to move a lecture forward as we demonstrated in the last slide. It can also just be a means of maintaining audience alertness, because if you know you're going to get asked questions that have a specific right answer, you might be a little bit more on your toes. Open-ended questions are ones that don't have a right answer but elicit discussion. So what would you do in this situation, for example? It also elicits opinions and may allow divergent views. So again, this is a good way of encouraging audience participation, but beware. This kind of question can unnecessarily prolong a session if you cannot curtail an unnecessarily long answer, or if the open-ended question then triggers a debate or discussion within the audience. So if you're going to use questions in your talk or your lecture, then these are some simple rules to play by. Make sure that the question itself is clear. You don't ask a question and there's just confusion about what the question is. You want to get to the answer. Don't pick on people, that just intimidates them. And try not to go in audience or in order around the room either, because if you start with number one and go straight across the line, by the time you reach the middle, the person you started with knows that they could fall asleep for the next 5 minutes before you get back to them. It's useful to allow two-way questioning. If you're going to ask your audience questions, let them ask you questions as well. It makes everybody a bit more comfortable. And then when somebody answers a question, make sure everybody has heard what they say. This can be particularly difficult in an online environment where people's technology and audio capacity is different. So you might ask a question and somebody in the room which you might answer, but everybody online didn't hear. So it's worth repeating the answer to the question that the person gave so that everybody can hear. Right. Yes, use humor. Don't overdo it. Make sure that the joke is appropriate. Definitely use real-life experiences. When you illustrate any teaching point with a real-life experience, it's much more likely to be remembered. So here is an approach that I often use when I am teaching, which is heavily using clinical examples. And I often will base an entire talk on around maybe 4 or 5 or 6 cases, each case illustrating one point that I might want to make. And the way you do this is, for each new topic, start with a clinical scenario and then use that scenario to expand on the topic you want to talk about. And in doing so, you can allow the scenario to develop with the discussion by introducing new material or using audience feedback to modify the scenario. Here's an example. So this may be a slide that you can use to start a topic. For example, this could be used to talk about cardiac failure. It could be used to talk about causes of acute shortness of breath. If you look carefully at the X-ray, it could be actually the starter in talking about complications of prosthetic heart valves. There are some pitfalls that you want to avoid when you are presenting your topic. Do not read from your slides. Slides are just a guide for you to remind you where you're going. If you're going to read from your slides, why don't you just give the audience your slides and let them read it themselves? Do not try to fit everything onto a slide, as when we talk about the audiovisual aids, you'll realize that your slides are useless if you do that. If you already have a lot of important information, you must give your audience, just give them handouts and leave your slides as minimalist as possible. Don't mumble. Do not talk to the screen, and do not talk to yourself. Make sure even in the online environment you are actually engaging with the audience in front of you. The audience in front of you through your computer screen. Closure. It's really important that you make sure to finish on time. Ask for any questions, clarification, or final points from your audience and give them enough time to get those things out of their head. And only after the question stage has finished do you summarize and then indicate you're finished. And really at that point, do not field any further questions. The last voice heard in your presentation should be yours, and that voice should be summarizing what you said before to ensure that everybody walks away with key points in their head. Are there any questions? If there are, you can WhatsApp me. You can bring up the questions during the Wednesday classes, or you can email me. So this second lecture covered 3 key stages in the presentation: reset, dialogue, and closure. In the final lecture, we will talk about the use of audiovisual aids. Thank you.